All right, we are on our applying percents unit, and our lesson today is on percent and estimation, which is 7-3 from our textbook. And our learning target for today is I can estimate percents using fractions and decimals. All right, so here we have an example, and we're looking at this graph. And before we even begin to read the questions, let's just look at what the graph is showing, or this image is showing us. So it's about how people learn to play an instrument, and they have on the side here are the different ways that people learn. So whether it's teaching themselves or taught by a friend, things like that. And then the different colors represent the gender, if it's a man or a woman. Okay? So our questions here, what fraction of women took lessons at school? Okay, so if we look at lessons at school, women is the purple, and that was 30%. And any percent can be, again, written out of 100, so 30 over 100. Now let's simplify that. Divide them both by 10, and you get 3/10. So 3/10 of women took lessons at school. Okay, and if 200 women were surveyed, how many of them took lessons at school? Okay, so we're looking at 200 women surveyed, and if we remember, we can take a percent, multiply it by the number of people surveyed. So 3/10, I'm going to write it as a decimal. And I'm going to multiply it by the 200 people surveyed. Okay, and a little trick that we can use is finding 10% of 200. To do that, we move the decimal over 1. So 10% of 200 is 20, and we're looking for 30%, so times 3 would be 60. Okay. So 60, if 200 women were surveyed, then 60 of them would have taken lessons at school. All right. Number 2 says use a fraction to estimate the number of women who took lessons at school, or number of men who took lessons at school. Okay, so lessons at school, men is blue, so that was 26%, which is 26 out of 100. Okay, now we're estimating, so we want to find fractions that are a little bit easier to work with. So 26% is close to 25%, and so we're looking for fractions like 10%, 25%, 50, 75, 100%. So those are the ones that are good for estimating. So I'm going to estimate this to be about 25%, which is equivalent to 1/4. So 1/4 of the men took lessons at school, and assume that the 200, we would take 1/4 of 200. Okay, so now we could take 200 and times it by 1/4, and we would find out 1/4 of 200 equals 50. So 50 men would have taken lessons at school. All right, here's an example to look at. It says, box turtles have been known to live for 120 years. American alligators have been known to live 42% as long as box turtles. How long can an American alligator live? Okay. And so we notice this word about, which means that we are going to estimate, so we're using fractions that are a little bit easier to work with. So 42% is really close to 40%. So if we do 40 out of 100, that simplifies down to 2/5. Yeah, that's a nice fraction to work with. And American alligators have been known to live 42% as long as box turtles. And so we are trying to find 42, or approximately 42% of 120, which means that we are going to multiply by 120. Okay. And when you multiply that out, it equals 48. So American alligators live to be about 48 years. Okay. All right, another method for estimating the percent of a number is to first find 10% of the number, which I was talking about in the last slide, and then to multiply. So for example, 70% would be 10% times 7. Okay, so 70% of a number equals 7 times 10% of that number. So Marita decides to leave a 20% tip on a restaurant bill of $14.72. About how much money should she tip the restaurant server? Okay, so what we would want to do, we want to estimate what 20% would be. So there's a couple ways we could do it. One way is that we could take 20%, which is 20 over 100, or 1/5. Okay, 14.72 is really close to 15, so we'll round it up to $15. So we could find 1/5 of 15. Okay. And when we do that, we find that it equals 3, so she would tip $3. Okay. Or the other way that we could do is to find 10% of it first. So we would find 10% of 15. Okay. Now 15 or 10%, like I said, you can multiply it by 0.1 or move the decimal over a spot, and that would tell us, sorry, this is a dollar sign. That would tell us that 10% of 15 is $1.50. Okay, so if she wants to leave 20%, we would then take that $1.50 and times it by 2, which equals 3, so she would tip $3. So two different ways to do it, either finding the 20% or finding 10% and then doubling it since we're looking for 20%. Another example to try here. Dante plans to put 80% of his paycheck into a savings account. His paycheck this week was $295. About how much money will he put in his savings account? So we're looking for, again, this word about means that we're going to round. So I'm going to round the $295 up to $300. So we're looking at 80% of 300. So again, two methods. You could multiply 80 out of 100 would reduce down to 4/5. You could take 4/5 times 300. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to find 10% of 300, which, so 10% of it, move the decimal over one spot, is 30. Okay, then you can take that 30, now we're looking for 80%, so we need to multiply it by 8. 3 times 8 is 24. Add your 0 back on. So it would be about $24. It would be about $240 that he would put in his savings account. All right, now we're going to look when we have percents that are greater than 100 or less than 1. And a quick study tip, something to note, to check for reasonableness. So when you are estimating the percent of a number and your percent is greater than 100, so for this example, we're looking at 122%, the estimate that we come out with it will always be greater than the number because it's more than 100%. Okay? So when we're estimating 122% of 50, I'm going to round that 122% to 120%. Okay? And now I'm going to split up that 120%. So first we're going to find what 100% of 50 would be. Okay? And then I'm going to add on the other 20% of 50. Add those two parts together. Okay? So the 100% we would take 1 times 50 because 100 is, or 100% is just 1. And then for the 20%, that is equivalent to 1/5 times 50. Okay. So we'd have 50 plus, okay, 1/5 times 50 would be 10. Add those together, and that would give you 60. So 120% of 50 would be 60. It should be greater than 50, okay, because 100% would give us 50. Okay, you can also estimate when it is less than 1. So we are estimating 1/4% of 589, and that 1/5%, okay, so 1/4, we're going to round to 1%, okay, and the 589 is about 600. Okay, so we're looking at 1% of 600. Okay, so let's turn that 1% into a decimal, move it 1, 2 to the left. So we're taking 1/100th and we're timesing it by 600. Okay, so 0.01 times 600, and that equals 6. Okay. And also to find 1%, you can move the decimal over 2 spots on here, and that will give you your answer. Okay. So that means that 1/4 of 6. Okay, so we found out what 1% of 600 would be, but we're looking for 1/4 of that. So now we could go and take 1/4 of 6. So 1/4 times 6, which equals 1.5. So then that would mean that 1/4% of 589 is approximately 1.5. So first we found out what 1% would be, and then we use that to find out that remaining 1/4%. Okay? Okay, a couple more you can try on your own. Come back and check. Okay. 174% of 200. Okay. Well, that would be 100. I'm going to round the 174 to be 175%. So that'd be a 100% and 75%. So 100% of 200, that's the full amount, that's 200. Okay. And then 75% of that would be 150. So you add those two together, 200 plus 150, and you get 350. Okay. $298 of 45. You could round the 298 up to 300%. And I'm going to round the 45 to be 50. Okay. So now 300%, turn that into a decimal by moving it 1, 2 to the left, and you get 3 times 50, which equals 150. So your answer would be approximately 150. So we're really just making these numbers into nicer numbers to work with. Okay. And the last one here, 25/100th%, okay, of 789. Okay, so this is going to be, again, that 1/4% as a fraction. And 789 we could round up to being 800. Sorry, this equals it, it's not about. So then again, that 1/4% we could round it up to 1. Okay, so find out what 1% of 800 would be by turning this into a decimal. Okay, 800 times 0.01, and you get 8. Then you could take 1/4 of 8, okay, which would be 8/4, which equals 2. So 2500% of 789 would be approximately 2. All right, one more example for you. Last year, 639 students attended a summer camp. Of those who attended this year, 9/10% also attended last year. About how many people attended the camp 2 years in a row? Okay, so about means we're estimating. Okay, so last year 639, which I'm going to round. That's approximately 600 students. Okay. And we're looking for 0.9% of that, which is approximately 1%. So we're finding 1% of 600. Again, to find 1%, we move the decimal over 2 spots, which is 6. So our answer would be approximately 6 students. Okay, so the question about how many people attended the camp 2 years in a row, 6 students attended 2 years in a row. All right, you can rewatch any part of this video if you're still a little confused. Otherwise, look at the online textbook, watch the tutor videos in there, or read through the examples. Otherwise, head on over and take the 7- through NICU at this time.